My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling my present activities unwise and untimely. Seldom do I pause to answer criticism of my work and ideas.
You deplore the demonstrations taking place in Birmingham, but your statement, I'm sorry to say, fails to express a similar concern for the condition that brought about the demonstrations.
As in so many past experiences, our hopes had been blasted, and the shadow of deep disappointment settled upon us.
We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed.
Perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait.
But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim,
when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill your black brothers and sisters,
when you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society,
when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and see tears welling up in her eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children.
When you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son who is asking, "Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean?"
When you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you.
When you are humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs reading white and colored.
When your first name becomes nigger, your middle name becomes boy, however old you are, and your last name becomes John, and your wife and mother are never given the respected title, Mrs.
When you are harried by day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro, living constantly at tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next, and are plagued with inner fears and outer resentments.
When you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait.
You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. This is certainly a legitimate concern.
How does one determine whether a law is just or unjust? A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law.
Of course, there is nothing new about this kind of civil disobedience. It was evidenced sublimely in the refusal of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to obey the laws of Nebuchadnezzar on the ground that a higher moral law was at stake.
We should never forget that everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal, and everything the Hungarian freedom fighters did in Hungary was illegal.
You speak of our activity in Birmingham as extreme. At first, I was rather disappointed that fellow clergymen would see my nonviolent efforts as those of an extremist.
I am grateful to God that through the influence of the Negro Church, the way of nonviolence became an integral part of our struggle.
If this philosophy had not emerged, by now ministries of the South, I am convinced, will be flowing with blood.
Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. The yearning for freedom eventually manifests itself, and that is what has happened to the American Negro.
But though I was initially disappointed at being categorized as an extremist, as I continued to think about the matter, I gradually gained a measure of satisfaction from the label.
Perhaps I was too optimistic. Perhaps I expected too much.
I suppose I should have realized that few members of the oppressor race can understand the deep groans and passionate yearnings of the oppressed race.
Things are different now. So often the contemporary church is a weak, ineffectual voice with an uncertain sound. So often it is an arch defender of the status quo.
I hope this letter finds you strong in the faith. I also hope that circumstances will soon make it possible for me to meet each of you, not as an integrationist or a civil rights leader, but as a fellow clergyman and a Christian brother.
Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away, and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities. And in some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all their scintillating beauty.
Yours for the cause of peace and brotherhood.
Martin Luther King, Jr.
Good afternoon. Today, on this somewhat balmy day on the campus of Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, I welcome you to the 16th annual Martin Luther King Jr. Lecture. My name is Lisa Cariagalo, and I am the Associate Provost for Academic Development and Diversity here at Brown. We are honored to have special guests present here in this auditorium today. You, including the Centers for Disease Control, as well as faculty and students from Harvard University, and a few representatives also from Yale and Hopkins and Penn. I want to especially acknowledge the many faculty and students at Tougaloo College who are watching this live stream. We are truly grateful to the president of Tougaloo College, Dr. Beverly Wade Hogan, and Provost Dr. Betty Parker Smith, for their commitment to sustaining the Brown-Tougaloo partnership. The video you have just seen is a clip from the longer half-hour version of a special video presentation of the reading of the letter from Birmingham Jail penned by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on April 16, 1963. It features 50 readers from Tougaloo College and Brown University. The video in its entirety will be available for viewing on the Brown-Tougaloo Partnership website. This afternoon, we honor MLK's legacy of social equity and justice, and also to ask ourselves and one another across our collective and diverse communities, where do we go from here? In August 1967, Dr. King delivered his last Southern Christian Leadership Conference presidential address with the theme, "Where do we go from here?" He says, and I quote, "I want to say to you, as I move to my conclusion, as we talk about where do we go from here, that we honestly face the fact that the movement must address itself to the question of restructuring the whole of American society. One day we must ask the question, why are there 40 million poor people in America? Sadly, we continue to ask the same questions today. According to the US Census Bureau in 2011, we had a 15% poverty rate, 46.2 million people living in poverty in America today. So, 10 days after the second term inauguration of President Barack Obama, 50 years after the 1963 March on Washington and Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, more than 2 years after the passage of the historic Affordable Care Act of 2010, what opportunities will we seize to learn from one another, to work together, even across our differences, to solve the pressing problems of our communities? Our participatory democracy requires each of us to respectfully engage in thoughtful, respectful dialogue to address persisting social inequities, particularly the inequities which have continued to negatively impact our diverse communities. So I thank all of you who have joined us today in the midst of your busy schedules to come together with us in a moment of reflection And as we imagine the important role we can play within our many communities to seek the kind of dream that MLK had for our country. Leadership matters, and we are privileged today to be hearing from the president of Brown University, Christina Paxson, who will make welcome remarks shortly, and our provost, Mark Schlissel, who shall introduce our keynote speaker. But first, I would like to introduce to you an incredibly talented group of students here at Brown. Shades of Brown was founded in 1986 by a group of African American students. They are multicultural, multi-ethnic, co-ed, musical performance group that performs songs rooted in the African American tradition, such as funk, hip hop, gospel, R&B, and soul. They also sing in several different languages, such as Swahili, Zulu, and Spanish. Shades performs both a cappella as well as with a live band in order to explore the diversity that exists within peoples of the African diaspora, both on the continent and across the Americas. So please, let's give a warm welcome to Shades of Brown singing Can't Give Up Now by Mary Mary.
Nobody told That was really terrific, by the way. Good afternoon. I am delighted to welcome you today. It is such a privilege to welcome the Reverend Dr. Bernice King to give our 16th annual lecture in honor of her father, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. I had the honor to welcome members of the Brown community to a panel discussion held on campus a little over a week ago on the official Martin Luther King Day. It was co-hosted by our Africana Studies Department and the Mountain Hope Neighborhood Association. And the panel focused on Dr. King's famous I Have a Dream speech, which he gave on August 28, 1963. As I said then, it's very difficult for me to believe that we are about to celebrate in 7 months the 50th anniversary of that great speech, in which Dr. King proclaimed his dream for Americans. It's hard to believe because the events of the civil rights struggle in the 60s still feel so fresh, so much a part of our contemporary history. And it's hard to believe even more because while a great deal has been accomplished, so much of the work remains unfinished. 1963 was a very eventful year in Dr. King's life. At the beginning of the 1960s, it wasn't at all clear that he would continue to lead the civil rights movement as he had when he was a young minister in Montgomery, Alabama. When the freedom rides of 1960 began, his leadership was not especially sought by the new generation of young activists, many of them still in college. In 1962, when James Meredith integrated the University of Mississippi, Dr. King was not directly involved. But almost inevitably, as the struggle intensified in 1963, Americans from all backgrounds came back to Dr. King, moved by his extraordinary eloquence, his personal courage, and his calm during a year that was anything but that. Consider how much he accomplished in that 1 year. On April 12th, Good Friday, King was incarcerated for, quote, parading without a permit in Birmingham, Alabama. From there, using scraps of paper a janitor gave to him, he issued his famous Letter from Birmingham Jail, one of the great works of protest writing in American history that we saw a bit of just at the beginning of this event. Later that spring, as violence engulfed Birmingham and police dogs attacked innocent protesters, King was in the middle of it. He was nearly killed when a bomb went off outside of his motel. But he kept his calm and his focus, and over the course of that spring, American public opinion began to support him. In June, John F. Kennedy declared that the civil rights movement was the matter of the highest national priority. The culminating moment of that progress was the unforgettable speech at the Lincoln Memorial on August 28th, when Dr. King did a very simple thing. He asked Americans to live up to the words we use to describe ourselves. If we want to be a country of freedom and rights and justice, then let's live up to those words. Let's make them more than words. Let's make them actions. It's hard to know exactly where Dr. King found his extraordinary eloquence. Much of it was probably innate. Much of it was nurtured by his deep immersion in the African American church. But I like to think that some of it came from the universities that shaped him. Morehouse College in Atlanta, the Crozier Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania, and Boston University, where he received his doctorate degree. I hope that all universities, and not just this one, take special pride in that fact when we consider Dr. King's legacy. Universities must be more than places where we acquire factual knowledge. They must also be laboratories for moral education and civil rights and human rights and the simple act of cohabitation in a single community with respect for all. Dr. King gave back to universities, too. He often spoke on campuses in the 1960s, and in consulting the record, I was delighted to see that he came to Brown University twice. In November of 1960, he came here for 2 days, which he spent talking to students, which I'm sure he enjoyed, and hailing the recent victory of John F. Kennedy and looking at our famous Lincoln collection. And then, in April of 1967, he returned at a crucial moment in his life when he was beginning to turn against the Vietnam War. When asked if his decision to advocate for the end of the war could hurt the civil rights movement or detract from it, he answered, "I think my failure to work for peace would hurt the other cause." Those words can still guide us as we struggle to build on his legacy today. Our schools and laboratories are still laboratories for social justice, just as they were in the heyday of the movement. We can and should ask the same questions he would have asked. Are our schools and colleges doing their job? Are we reaching enough people? What can we do as universities to attack the inequities in healthcare that divide our society, a topic that will be addressed by Dr. Bernice King today? We've come a long way since 1963, but as Dr. Martin Luther King would be the first to point out if he could be here, we have a ways to go yet. His worldwide fame is a triumph, but we must guard against the illusion of success, because the simple fact is that the civil rights struggle is not entirely won. As all of you in this room know, we still have division and unequal opportunity and unequal access to resources and good jobs and education, and sadly, we probably always will. But every day we make progress toward those goals, we honor the visionary who glimpsed the mountaintop and beyond it, the promised land of full equality. I want to close with one final thought. A central premise of the great speech of August 1963 is that we have essential birthrights as Americans, and that every generation tries its best to live up to them. In recent years, some of the same logic has applied to a different movement, a movement whose goal is to expand justice and equal opportunity for Americans, regardless of their sexual orientations. The issues are different, the times are different, but in both movements, an idea that was once considered unacceptable has come to the mainstream. The recent election in November 2012 was a watershed. Right here in Rhode Island, our State House of Representatives recently passed a bill in support of gay marriage, and our state Senate will take it up soon. And so it strikes me as appropriate that as we honor Dr. King with this lecture every year, this year we should also honor the man who organized the March on Washington, Bayard Rustin, who fought intolerance and inequality on behalf of his sexuality as well as his race. What we're fighting for, all of us in our own ways, is simply a world in which doors are open to all people. So in that spirit, let me just say that the doors of Brown University are open to all of you this afternoon. I'm honored to welcome all of you to this special lecture, and now I'd like to ask Provost Mark Schlissel to introduce our special guest, the Reverend Dr. Bernice King. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. It's my pleasure, as well as a personal honor, to introduce this year's Martin Luther King Jr. lecturer, Dr. Bernice King. Dr. King, the youngest of Martin Luther King's 4 children, is the CEO of the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change in Atlanta, Georgia. The King Center was formed by Dr. King's mother, the civil rights advocate and leader, Coretta Scott King, in honor of her slain husband in 1968. Its mission is to train people in Dr. King's philosophy of nonviolent social change. It also houses and makes available to the public and to scholars the world's greatest collection of documents from the civil rights movement. Coretta Scott King, who died in 2006, traveled the world speaking out on behalf of racial and economic justice, women's and children's rights, gay and lesbian dignity, religious freedom, the needs of the poor and the homeless, full employment, health care, educational opportunities, nuclear disarmament, and environmental justice. She lent her support to pro-democracy movements worldwide and consulted with many world leaders, including Corazon Aquino, Kenneth Kaunda, and Nelson Mandela. Today's King lecturer, Dr. Bernice King, holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from Spelman College in Atlanta and earned both a Master's of Divinity and a law degree from Emory University. She's a former law clerk and current member of the State Bar of Georgia. In 2007, Dr. King founded Be a King Scholarship at Spelman in honor of her mother's legacy. The scholarship is awarded to 2 rising seniors at Spelman who are majoring in music education or psychology. Dr. King has carried forward her family's legacy by speaking out on issues of social justice and civil rights. She's nationally and internationally recognized as a powerful, motivating, and life-changing orator. Dr. King has published a collection of her speeches and sermons titled Hard Questions, Heart Answers. One review said of this book, evoking the dream of social justice and racial equality that her father envisioned so many years ago, Hard Questions, Heart Answers offers the insight, empowerment, and hope that can make that dream a reality. Dr. King's address today is entitled Advancing the Dream, Addressing Social Equity Issues to Eliminate Health Disparities in the 21st Century. We invite you to stay afterward for question and answers and join us for a reception thereafter. Dr. King, welcome very much to Brown.
Now it works. Thank you. Let me thank Mark Swizzle for that very gracious introduction to President Paxson and to all of you. I'm honored and delighted to be with you this afternoon, early evening, members of the faculty and administration, Brown University students, and people of Providence. I certainly want to say how humbled I am to join so many of your previous distinguished lecturers for the Martin Luther King Jr. Lecture. And so I am very honored to be a part of this day. I have been asked to speak about a subject. I'm not an expert, so let me give that disclaimer at the outset. The only thing that I would say I would be close to being an expert in is that what all of us are experts in, and that is this human experience that we are all having as spiritual beings. Before I dive in, let me just say this is an emotionally resonant day for me because it is the 7th anniversary of my mother's homegoing, who made her transition in about a few hours from now in 2006, and I was with her. It was perhaps one of the most difficult moments of my life, but one of the greatest moments of my life. For those of you who have lost loved ones, you understand the gift and the blessing of being present with them when they make their transition. There's no greater gift than to be there. It certainly puts you in a place where all of the guilt, perhaps, that many people experience because maybe they didn't do enough or they weren't there enough or things of that nature. That one moment in and of itself makes up for all of that. And I was just honored to be with my mother. I had been caring for her along with my sister, tag teaming, and other caregivers for about close to 8 months prior to that. And so I thank God for that blessing. But since she's left us, there's a growing appreciation of her role as a leader in her own right, as well as being the greatest supporter of Martin Luther King Jr. She was not only his wife and mother for all 4 of us, but a committed partner, confidant, and probably his foremost advisor in the great cause for which they both were called to serve. her devotion and dedication made it possible for Daddy to do his great work. And he said so on many occasions. And I want to share one of those quotes with you. He said, "I had to have a wife who would be as dedicated as I was. I wish I could say that I led her down this path, but I must say we went down the path together, because she was as actively involved and concerned when we met as she is now. My devoted wife has been a constant source of consolation to me through all of the difficulties that we faced. In the most tragic experiences, she never became panicky or over-emotional. I have come to see that the real meaning of that rather trite statement, a wife can either make or break a husband. My wife was always stronger than I was through the struggle. I'm convinced that if I had not had a wife with the fortitude, strength, and calmness of Corey, I could not have withstood the ordeals and tensions surrounding the movement. She saw the greatness of the movement and had a unique willingness to sacrifice herself for its continuation. If I've done anything in this struggle, it is because I've had behind me and at my side a devoted, understanding, dedicated, patient companion in the person of my wife." And so I share that because as I approach this lecture on today, before I delve into the subject that I've been asked to address, I want to place it in this context for our understanding, because oftentimes when we think about the work of Martin Luther King Jr., we fail to recognize that his notoriety was not automatic. In fact, if it were not for Coretta Scott King, more than likely he would have been a page just in history and not a source of constant inspiration for people all over the world. When my father died in 1968, he was one of the most hated men in America. And today, he's one of the most loved men in the world. And that's because for 39 years after his assassination, my mother made a single decision, and that was to institutionalize his legacy via the King Center and via the federal holiday. She was the one who pounded the pavement. She was the one who reminded us of what gave fuel and energy and inspiration to the movement. And that was his nonviolent philosophy and methodology. That philosophy is his greatest, in my opinion, gift to America and the world. In fact, it has been said that Gandhi himself, whom my father drew his tactics from, he indicated that he drew his inspiration from Jesus Christ and his tactics from Gandhi. But Gandhi himself remarked that perhaps a Black American, I don't know if he used the word Negro because of the context of the time, will introduce nonviolence to the world. So that was a prophetic pronouncement by Mahatma Gandhi that we now are witnessing the truth of. Because nonviolence has now spread all across the world, and many people are utilizing it in their movements for freedom and justice. And so as I stand, I give honor and recognition to my mother because she's often lost in the equation when we talk about Martin Luther King Jr. And she was the most articulate persons in terms of his philosophy. There's no writer, even those who worked with him, that I believe embodied the ideals and the principles of that philosophy and methodology as she did, and ensured that we would never, ever forget it. And so now I find myself in the unique position as heading the King Center CEO of ensuring that generations of people understand that philosophy. Because the reality is that if we don't embrace it, as my father said, and I paraphrase, we will destroy ourselves in the misuse of our own instruments. So we have to find a way to come to the table of agreement on a philosophy of life, not just a tactic to be used from moment to moment, situation to situation, but a mindset, a heart set, a spiritual framework, a moral framework. And that's what he gave to us. And so it's much more encompassing than many people have understood it. Most people see it applying in the context of some of our issues of physical violence and guns and urban violence and bullying. And while it does apply in those instances, none of us, including myself, is exempt from its application because it is a measuring rod for how we connect and relate to each other as humanity. It inserts and injects the humanity in every dialogue, discussion, engagement, situation, issue, problem, circumstance. It does not discount the fact that there will be disagreements and conflict. Those, as we know, as was indicated earlier, those problems and issues are inevitable in human nature. But what it gives us is a discipline and a practice to rise above what I call our lower nature, sometimes our animalistic nature, to operating from a higher framework, our superconscious mind, and at the end of the day, to address things from a posture of dignity and respect. And so when we think about this entire philosophy and its framework and how we approach even ridding ourselves of these health disparities, we first and foremost have to recognize that this particular philosophy, when it's studied, when it's understood, gives us a point of departure by understanding our interconnectedness and our interrelatedness, and the fact that we are members of one big human family. I know we talk about race, but there's only one race, and that's the human race. And we've allowed our external designations to create further divide amongst ourselves. And we have not found that way to honor our individual personhood, regardless of our definitions. And so starting from that place and understanding in this philosophy that it is person-centric, my father, in fact, warned us during his day that we must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a people-centered society. And I wonder sometimes if we had just listened and do what he suggested we do, which was to reorder our priorities and have a radical revolution of values in America. He wrote those things in a book called Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos of Community in 1967. The last chapter entitled A World House. I'm just curious, how many people in this audience have actually read books authored, not written about him, but authored by Martin Luther King Jr.? Okay, that's good. We have to increase those numbers. Because one of the things that my mother used to always emphasize is it's important to read the source first and then the secondary sources. Because a lot of times we get interpretations that aren't necessarily accurate. And so I want to encourage you just to purchase those books. They are available. The ones in particular, Stride Toward Freedom, which is the story that chronicles the Montgomery movement, where everything began, and his pilgrimage to nonviolence. Strength of Love, which is a collection of sermons that he delivered. And that whole philosophy is based off of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount: love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that use you, and pray for them that despitefully, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them that despitefully use you. And so that's the other book. The third book is Why We Can't Wait, which is the Birmingham story, which this letter from the Birmingham jail came from. And just to expand on what was said concerning the Birmingham jail letter, he actually wrote it on toilet paper. He started out writing on the margins of newspapers that were brought into him. And when he ran out of the newspaper, he wrote it on toilet paper. Now, y'all know that had to be some hard toilet paper. You know, there's a lot of discussion and dialogue about my father being a plagiarist. And as far as I'm concerned, even if people think they have proof of that, that letter in and of itself indicates that he was brilliant because he had no resources when he wrote it. And as you heard, I mean, you just can't write that kind of discourse without something that is fundamentally embedded in who you are, in the absence of being able to pick up a dictionary or do research, as we are able to do today via the internet. So he had to draw from what he had experienced and understood in his life journey. And then the final book, as I said, is Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos of Community. There's another one, Measure of a Man, and then Trumpet of Conscience, that talks about the youth struggles. But I highlighted all of that because I believe everything that we dialogue about, discuss, every social ill that we are dealing with in America and across the world could be adequately responded to and addressed through Dr. King's leadership philosophy. And that's why I'm devoted and dedicated through the King Center of ensuring that so many people, especially young people, high school students, middle-aged students, and college students, grasp it. And those that are going to be working in many different fields and endeavors, because we've got to saturate our culture, global culture, with this philosophy and methodology, because as he said, the choice is no longer between violence and nonviolence. It's between nonviolence and non-existence. And so we have to find a more excellent way, and I believe that is it. It helps us to better understand the importance of each one of us. Now, I know this is awkward and strange in a lecture, but I would like for you to just tell the person next to you that you are extremely important. But now I want to challenge you to say something else, because every system that we have created and operate from, whether it's in our educational, our political, governmental, our entertainment, media, system structures, unfortunately are based off of a valuing, a value measurement. You know, if you are this, this, and this, you are more valuable. And that philosophy dispels that, because the highlighted portion of his speech, that my 4 children will one day live in a nation where they would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, was really about engaging people according to their character. And so that causes you to move beyond the barriers and the restrictions and the prejudices and everything, and really go into the internal self, the being, the essence and the nature of a person. Not what they look like, but their essence and nature, and start with that. Then we have to find a way to separate that intrinsic value and worth from behavior. It never ceases to amaze me when we talk about individuals, and I can say this as one who's been a victim of gun violence more than once. My grandmother was shot in church by a deranged man, kind of deranged like what has happened in Aurora, Colorado, and Newtown, Connecticut. But we've got to get out of labeling people first and foremost outside of the context that, and this is hard for most of us to hear because we think there are throwaways, worthless people. But God made us all in his image and after his likeness, and something went awry. But we can't discount the fact of the intrinsic value of the person and attack the behavior and the expressions that come out as opposed to that personhood. And that's what this philosophy causes us to do and helps us to see how to create policies and practice and how to disseminate and how to distribute and how to deliver goods and services. And so tell the other person next to you, you are extremely valuable. Now, I said all that to set the context for the rest of what I have to say regarding health disparities, because it does boil down to the mentality, how we see individuals. And this nonviolent philosophy helps us to see people different, or it helps us to see that people are a part of us. In fact, there's probably only 1% DNA difference between all of us. You know, in my faith tradition, there's a scripture that says, from one blood he has made all nations to dwell on the face of the earth. I fundamentally believe we're related, and we're all a little dysfunctional. Really. Because we're all trying to figure it out, and we were born into some flawed systems and structures, and I really believe that Dr. King was a gift to give us a way back to a better way so that we can rid ourselves of the triple evils of what he called poverty, racism, and militarism. And how we, and I keep saying this word, how we distribute, how we disseminate, and how we deliver things, policies, practices, goods and services. So it's a philosophy we must or will be forced to embrace at some point, especially if we're talking about creating a society in which everyone can share in the fruits of freedom, justice, and peace. We need to understand that the foundation of every individual, of every race, creed, and culture is good health. Of all the forms of discrimination, perhaps the most damaging is disparities in healthcare. We live in these bodies. We operate out of these bodies. If we don't have our health, just like if we don't address our environmental issues, everything else won't even matter. And so we've got to fundamentally address these disparities. And by this, I mean that certain groups have been denied access to decent health care, again, as we think about the delivery, the dissemination, and the distribution. And these disparities are often reflected in comparative health care statistics. Before I go into those statistics, I want to mention a few things, some bullets, for those of you who are taking a few notes. Yes, there have been significant advances in medicine, life expectancy, and disease prevention, but not all communities have benefited. Communities of color continue to experience a higher burden of disease and shorter lifespans. Many of these health disparities are actually preventable. They are related to a person's biology, family history, age, and their individual behaviors, such as alcohol and drug use, smoking, diet, patterns of physical activity, to name a few. They are also, though, related to where a person lives, the quality of your housing, the safety of your neighborhood, if you're exposed to crime and violence, trash, noise, and other disruptions in community. And a biggie is residential segregation. And I'd like to say zip code segregation is one of the significant drivers of health disparities because it determines whether or not people have access, the delivery, the dissemination, and the distribution of resources and services they need to be well. Disadvantaged communities of color tend to be saturated with fast food restaurants. This is no irony, you all. Convenience stores and liquid stores. Goes back to the value. Those communities are often seen as not being as valuable, or perhaps even not caring about themselves. And so why not flood them with fast food restaurants, convenience stores, and liquor stores? You don't find that in other communities. We got to look at these things. These are not accidents. It's the mentality and it's the mindset that Daddy was trying to help change in the 50s and 60s that we got to still change in 2013 going forward. They tend to be policed differently. There are high rates of incarceration, which disrupts family structures, compromises the future of those who are incarcerated when they return to the community, and they are at increased risk for exposure to HIV while in prison. There are high rates of substance abuse. Concentrated poverty produces chronic stress, which contributes to the likelihood of developing certain chronic diseases. Income and education levels. How we disseminate, deliver, and distribute education in America contributes to how healthy people are, whether they are employed and if they can get to employment opportunities. There's a digital divide, which means that many people don't have access to the internet. Dissemination, delivery, I'm gonna keep saying that, and distribution. Because if you don't have a value for our personhood, regardless of how we define ourselves externally, and we rate things on scales of 0 to 100, we're going to keep getting the same thing over and over again. So we have to change our philosophy of life and how we see people. So these other technologies limit their access to health education and other information that can protect their health, as well as applying for jobs. Low-wage jobs typically don't provide health insurance or adequate level leave to cover unexpected illnesses or visits to the doctor. And as we become more and more diverse, having access to healthcare providers who speak the language of their patients is an ongoing challenge. We need translators to assist with communicating with their doctors. We can't have the attitude, and I struggle in this area too, that, everybody, I believe, we do need a single language, but we also have to respect the fact that there are others who want to hold on to their cultural language. And so how do we distribute, disseminate, and deliver health care in a manner that these people get the same quality because there's someone there who respects the fact that they deserve to be communicated in their language? Oh, yes, it's difficult. Some people may think that's not fair. Some people may think it might be more costly, but life is costly. And it's also costly for us to cheapen ourselves by not respecting the personhood of each individual. And so we need providers who understand the cultural backgrounds of the people they serve. It's stretching us. We're the ones who said, bring me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, longing to be free. Now, maybe you didn't say that, but guess what? We got here on different ships and boats, but we all in the same boat now. And the hole might have it may have a hole in it on that side, but as one story says, ha, 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 you got a hole in your side of the boat, on your side of town, in your community, with your ethnicity, but guess what? Eventually, enough of that water is going to get in that boat, and we're all going to drown. So we got to work together to save ourselves, our society, because as Daddy said, we are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. And what affects one directly affects all indirectly. I cannot be all that I ought be unless you are all that you ought be. And you cannot be all that you ought be unless I am all that I ought be. That's the greatness of America. Discrimination, racism, and distrust of the healthcare system are barriers to getting much needed healthcare. And many people, because of that, delay seeking care because of these attitudes and end up sicker with poor prognoses. So now, what are some of the specifics? And I know some of y'all are saying, don't bore me with this, but sometimes we need to hear the reality. According to data provided by CDC, and some of them are here today, and I'm glad to have them here with us. One of the gentlemen that's on loan to the King Center, Carlton Duncan, is here with us, and others that are part of the CDC, so I want to thank them for being here today. In 2007, the average African American only expected to live 73.6 years compared with 78.4 years for the average white American. African Americans between 45 and 75 years of age had a much higher heart disease death rate than the cohorts of other races. In addition, African Americans younger than 75 years of age die more often from heart disease than white people of the same age. We also find higher rates of obesity and hypertension among Latino and African Americans. The mortality rate for African American women is 2.4 times greater than for non-Hispanic white women. And so we're challenged to work together with this philosophy of nonviolence to build support for a colorblind disease prevention and treatment, verified by the elimination of disparate patterns of health indicators like infant mortality, illness survival rates, and longevity. This must become, as Daddy said, reordering our priorities. This must become a leading priority for our nation as we strive to fulfill his dream. Poverty, as we heard earlier today, more than any other factor, prevents people from getting proper medical care and having a nutritious diet. It does afflict people of color disproportionately, but it can be found in alarming proportions among all races, even in the most economically advanced nation on the earth. If we want a healthy society, we must escalate the war on poverty wherever it occurs. Ironically, my father was not killed because he was saying, "Kumbaya, we shall overcome." He was killed because he saw fundamentally an interconnectedness between our distribution of wealth and how we place more wealth or place more funds towards death and destruction, specifically war, than we do on human life. And so he was criticizing the Johnson administration for not putting the amount of emphasis and funds in the war on poverty in 1967 and 68. And today, poverty is worse than it was than when Daddy started his Poor People's Campaign in 1968. And I wonder if he had lived, where would we really be? Because he did not get a chance to go to Washington, D.C., as he had hoped, with hundreds, perhaps thousands of impoverished individuals to occupy our nation's capital until the distribution of wealth was addressed appropriately, until there was consideration for a livable wage. And so we must admit that decent health care is not a matter of providing better access to medical care only. Individuals do have a responsibility for their own health, and a lot more can be done in this regard. Right here in our country, upwards of 400,000 Americans die every year from the effects of smoking tobacco. I really don't even want to stress that point because I think most of us understand that. It's a global epidemic, and we need a stronger global campaign to prevent addiction to tobacco, especially among young people. The same can be said about unhealthy diets. In many countries, the challenge is getting enough to eat, period. But all too often, even when there's plenty to eat, do y'all realize we got more than enough to eat? There's a young lady that travels with me, and I recently told her, I said, you know, we should try one time going to a restaurant and ordering one entree and sharing it. Because, I mean, I struggle with wasting food. I don't know how you feel about it, but I think about all the hunger in the world and the fact that people are unhealthy because they don't have nutrition. And we waste a lot of food every day. I mean, it's a lot of greed in America. And that's what Dr. King was trying to guard against and protect us from. And so we've got to start making some different diet choices. The U.S. is Exhibit A when it comes to obesity, which contributes to a broad range of serious illnesses, including diabetes, heart disease, and various cancers. Drug abuse is another category. It's important to reduce disparities in health and health care. I'm sorry, I got off track, y'all. In terms of the drug abuse, where bad individual choices have a massive adverse effect on health. And we know about the lack of exercise. Anybody guilty? All guilty parties? Join with me. Because my diet is great, but my exercise is poor. Here in the U.S., for example, we have become a nation of couch potatoes watching too much TV and not getting enough exercise. To help address this problem, we have, through the King Center, with the CDC and sometimes with insurance companies, have educated people about the perils of child obesity in the African American community. America needs much more such forums to promote awareness of the problem and resources for solution for young people of all races, and I applaud our First Lady in heightening that awareness and campaign in our nation. Clearly, we have to do a better job of educating people about the destructive effects of bad choices with regard to tobacco, drugs, and unhealthy food. If we could cut bad choices by 20%, imagine the savings that could be applied to upgrading medical technology and healthcare delivery. We must remove all systemic barriers to good health and foster a greater commitment to help people of all races to have basic health security. But we also must do a better job of educating them to take more personal responsibility for eliminating toxic substances and unhealthy behaviors from their own lives. The challenge of health security requires both social and personal commitment if we are to make genuine progress in the years ahead. My father held a strong conviction that health care is a basic human right like food and shelter, not something that should be negotiated in the marketplace nor provided to people in accordance with their economic status. As an African American, he recognized that there were profound racial and social economic disparities in the delivery, there's that word again, of health care that must be addressed. We have, as I said, created systems that values people according to race, ethnicity, and class, not the content of their character. As a result, he believed that our man-made, profit-driven delivery, distribution, and dissemination systems lead to the creation of a dehumanizing, thing-oriented society. He held the conviction that this destructive mindset must be corrected so we can create, as I said earlier, a person-centered society that addresses human needs, including a healthcare system that serves all people. The philosophy of nonviolence can help to elevate our thinking about social problems and solutions. He was really saying that we begin by respecting, and I'm re-emphasizing this because if you leave here today, I want you to remember this one thing. We are all members of the human family, and we all share intrinsic worth because we are all made in God's image. This should guide how we relate to each other and how we approach social and interpersonal conflict. And so we urgently need this philosophy for our times. His holistic vision of the beloved community embrace this interdependence of humanity rather than separation. He once said, as long as there's poverty in the world, I can never be rich. Even if I have $1 billion, as long as diseases are rampant and millions of people in this world cannot expect to live more than 28 or 30 years, I can never be totally healthy, even if I just got a checkup at the Mayo Clinic. He once said, God intends all of his children to have the basic necessities for a meaningful, helpful life. Following his lead, my mother once said, healthcare ought to be considered a fundamental human right in any civilized nation. In my book, the #1 consideration of our national security is our healthcare delivery system. And I've said that over and over again. Most of us will never, ever experience a terroristic attack. But every day, most of us are connected to, if not personally ourselves, with individuals who are suffering and being terrorized by all kinds of diseases. And yet, we put more money in the military and little money in healthcare and education. Something is fundamentally wrong with that. And one day we're going to wake up and, as they say, smell the coffee. Because we have to shift this. It does not mean that we should not perhaps protect ourselves as a nation. But how are we really protecting ourselves if we are not putting a priority on and the investment in our own health and wellness? And so, in terms of our needed reforms, I commend our president for his leadership in passing the Affordable Care Act, which broadens health insurance coverage to millions more citizens. It's a good start, but as we move forward in our quest to create a healthier society, we must set higher standards. My mother served once as national co-chair of the Committee for National Health Insurance, and she advocated 3 principles, basic, for health care reform, and I think they still merit consideration. First, Every American must be covered. No family should be unfairly burdened by a sudden catastrophic illness that forces them to deplete their life savings and other assets. No citizen should be denied decent medical care or needed equipment or medication because their income is too low or they don't have a job. Second, benefits must be permanent and portable, kind of like 401k. No one should fear losing their health care coverage when they change jobs or become unemployed. Let us now move forward to make sure that every American has this protection. Third, health care must be affordable. If this means that fees and costs are more stringently regulated, then so be it. We all have to share in the sacrifice, and especially the insurance industry. Most of us don't want to touch that. I don't know why we're so afraid to uncover the realities and the truth, but I'm not. I am my Father's child. As the institutional champion of the King legacy, the King Center is deeply concerned with public health issues, particularly those which bear on violence prevention. The King Center's experience in violence prevention can be a significant resource for helping to create a more nonviolent society. We know that violence is America's leading public health problem. As former U.S. Surgeon General Edward Koop explained, violence in American public and private life has indeed assumed the proportions of an epidemic. Epidemic violence, however, can be addressed and even prevented to a great extent with enhanced community commitment. It is violence, a disease of the spirit. It thrives where there is poverty, ignorance, alienation, or social neglect. Daddy once said, violence is the voice or the language of the unheard. If we want to eliminate it or even reduce it significantly, we must understand the role of these factors and fashion initiatives that address them directly. Many have been deeply affected by the terrible shootings that occurred last year, especially the most recent massacre of children in their classrooms in Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. These horrific incidents have made us aware of the sickness of violence that continues to fester in our society. My hope is that we are finally ready to rise up and take action to restrict assault weapons and high-capacity ammunition clips. And with a footnote, in 1956, January 27th, January 30th, my parents' home was bombed in Montgomery, Alabama. My father was at a mass meeting. They held mass meetings during that time to educate and keep people inspired on staying nonviolent. He got the message, came to the house. My mother and sister were in the home when the bomb went off. Fortunately, my mother had an instinct to move to the back of the house when she heard a thump. Thank God. And so when he got there, checked on them, went out to the crowd. Many of the black citizens, Negroes as we referred to at the time, had gathered with their guns and their rifles, and they were ready to take care of some business. Now, basically, as a human being, instinctually, they could have done just that. But Dr. King stood before them and gave them an alternative. And he said, take your weapons home. He didn't even tell them, don't have them. But he said, take your weapons home, because we're going to fight this with Christian love. We're going to fight this another way, because he who lives by the sword will perish by the sword. And an unbelievable act occurred from men who wanted to protect their homes and their children and their wives and their territory. It was the greatest experience, I believe, of gun control this nation has ever had. Because that particular day, they could have taken care of some business and defended themselves. And from that day forward, in spite of the fact that their homes were terrorized, because you have to understand, it was one thing to stand up to bus segregation, but now it's another thing when somebody's coming and terrorizing my home. So what do? Dr. King introduced a more excellent and a higher way. And I know that's not easy for most of us. I grew up in it. I don't own a gun, don't want to own a gun, because I believe guns attract guns. And it does not mean that you won't die by gun violence. But I have grown up to understand that there's a discipline that we have to operate out of. And we've got to find a way to embrace a more nonviolent culture and not think that arming ourselves more is going to handle the problem. Violence begets violence. And all we'll get is just more violence. They say, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth leaves everybody blind and toothless. And that's where we are in America. So we have to have the bravery and the courage to not leave it up to our president and our senators and our congressmen. But we've got to stand up, and we've got to speak up. And we've got to talk about a more excellent way. So even if you keep your guns, that's your prerogative. My father applied for a gun thereafter. But he had to wrestle as the leader of a nonviolent struggle. Am I going to go down the path of teaching people this more excellent way and be hypocritical? Or am I going to take the higher road and set the example and use extreme discipline? And so he opted not to have a gun. In fact, when the people came around to guard his home, he eventually told them, we can't do it this way. So they had to put the guns away. So I wanted to say this is a critical issue in our nation right now, and we've got to address it. We should also be disturbed by the reports that perpetrators of mass murder in Newtown, Aurora, in Norway, and other places were addicted to hyper-violent video games. Something is very wrong when people think it is okay to glorify violence, to create more, to produce more violent games, when there is ample evidence that media violence has a destructive effect. And so we've got to begin an ongoing national dialogue that confronts this problem head-on and challenges our young people, as well as business leaders who sell these games, to give this problem some serious thought. When kids are growing up, they want sugar. Right? You want sugar. Most of us are addicted to sugar. If you ask anybody, well, the hardest thing for me to give up is sweets. But if your child comes to you with that voracious appetite for sugar, you don't just feed them more sugar. You have to help them to discipline their appetite. So as the server of the food to them, you have that responsibility. Those who create, who manufacture music and video games have a responsibility to make sure that we are serving healthy music, healthy video games, because all we're doing is creating further death and destruction in our land, and we've got to stand up to that as well. I do feel there's a lot we can do to inoculate young people against the toxic virus of violence. We must address the problem directly and get young people involved in violence prevention dialogue. At the center, we've had some success in educating people about my father's philosophy and method of nonviolent conflict reconciliation. Last summer, for example, we held 2 sessions of a summer camp entitled Now, the Now Encounter. The Now stands for Nonviolence Opportunity Watch. They were highly interactive educational experiences, which included young people from Atlanta, Birmingham, and as far away as Cyprus. The youth who completed our program gained an advanced understanding of the techniques for resolving disputes and reconciling adversaries in their communities. We showed them that it's possible to make nonviolence a way of life. We hope to duplicate this program dramatically increase the number of young people who participate in it in the years ahead. I would encourage everyone to learn more about the amazing power of nonviolence as a tool for conflict resolution, healing, and reconciliation. This may be the most important and enduring aspect of the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King. So I urge you, as I said earlier, to study his life, leadership, and teachings as we approach the 50th anniversary of his dream. Our webpage is full of social media, and our social media outlets are full of information about my father's philosophy and methods of nonviolence. You can also learn about the 6 principles and steps to nonviolence as well, and I will just say those briefly and come to a close. The first is that nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. The second is that we must seek reconciliation with our adversaries, not conquest over them. In other words, we seek friendship and understanding. Third, we must eradicate injustice, not people. We don't seek to destroy people, but the injustice. Fourth, we must accept suffering, but we must never inflict violence. Unearned suffering is redemptive. Ask John Lewis, who was beat upside the head and almost left for dead in 1965 with Bloody Sunday, who has now the opportunity as an elected congressman to serve in the administration of the first African-American president. Unearned suffering is redemptive. The fifth principle, the fifth principle is that we reject hatred and animosity towards anyone, including adversaries. And the sixth is that the universe is on the side of justice. So we keep the faith that justice will be done. These are the character foundations needed to be an effective practitioner of nonviolence. And as I said, you can learn more at the King Center. I hope that you will join us for the 50th anniversary of my father's dream. There's much to be encouraged about. We're entering an exciting phase in the nonviolent struggle for freedom and peace and justice. Nonviolent movements are beginning to internationalize, thanks in part to telecommunications revolution. And I would like all of those who are social media savvy to join us in our Twitter campaign at King Center ATL using the hashtag King's Dream, hashtag I Am Freedom, as we celebrate this 50th anniversary and what that means to you and the things that you're doing to advance the freedom that Dr. King talked about in his speech. And so I want to close with this. I want to close with a story because I think it's apropos if we're going to make any lasting impact in our world. It's about a man, and ladies, if you want to envision a woman, who died and was visited by an angel. He went to one kingdom on one side of the universe, and he saw this big, huge banquet table. Food was laid out all over the place. There were all kinds of food, even the kind of food that vegans or vegetarians would enjoy. So yes, there was tofu at the feast. Hummus. But this man noticed something strange. These people's bodies were frail. There was no mobility of limbs. There was no laughter, no joy being exuded. And he said, whoa, wait a minute. Why with all of this delicious food, the people seem to be so inept? They seem to be immobile. They seem to be unhappy. And the angel said, there's one law in the entire universe. Angel quickly rushed the man off to another kingdom on the other side of the universe. There he saw the same banquet table and the same foods laid out the same exact way. But the people were very different. They were excited. They were jubilant. They had forward-moving progress. And the man stepped back and said, whoa, wait a minute. What is the difference in these two kingdoms? And the angel said, there's just one law in the entire universe. But he went on to explain, the law is simply this. You must use the utensils provided by the management. But these utensils were 10 feet long, 10 feet, forks, knives, and spoons. He said, you see, in that first kingdom, where the bodies were frail, there was no mobility of limbs, there was no joy, no excitement. He said they were taking these 10 feet utensils and seeking to feed themselves, and they were literally starving to death. But he said in that second kingdom, where was joy and excitement and mobility of limbs and forward-moving progress, they decided to reach across the table and feed each other. And if we're going to address the fundamental issues of disparities in this nation, if we're going to address the social inequities in our world, then we're going to have to learn to reach across the table and feed each other. We got to reach across the barriers and the restrictions and the inhibitions and the fears and the prejudices, and we've got to learn to feed each other. And I believe when we do all of that, and this kind of commitment, one day, not in the too distant future, the dream of Martin Luther King Jr. will no longer be a distant ideal. It will become a luminous reality, and we will all be able to say with him, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we in this world are truly free at last. Thank you, and God bless you. You know, stand up.
Thank you, Dr. King, for inspiring us, stretching us, and indeed challenging us. We have just a few minutes for questions, and if you could make your question short, we might have 2 minutes. And I wanted to take the prerogative, actually, of asking a question that was sent to us from Tougaloo College. So the question, Dr. King, is, when injustice is in the form of openly segregated public spaces, transportation, and schools, nonviolent protests could take the form of physically desegregating those places. I'm thinking of lunch counter sit-ins, Rosa Parks, and James Meredith. Nowadays, prejudice is often kept hidden. What nonviolent actions do you recommend we use to protest against more subtle kinds of injustice, like inequality in healthcare, discrimination by environmental pollution, and gerrymandering? From Tougaloo College.
Well, in my father's nonviolent philosophy, first you have to embrace those principles, because that's very fundamental. Oftentimes when we see demonstrations today or protests today, people have not embraced the philosophies, because you can feel and sense some of the hatred and the hostile tones that often emerge in these kind of situations. So the first thing is to embrace those 6 principles, but in the steps of nonviolence, which is more of the practical side of it, the first step is information gathering. It's educating, information gathering, research, all of that kind of stuff. The second step is educating the masses. What most people saw in the 60s, by the time they got to the streets and to the lunch counters and all of that, they had already been through this process. And so we first and foremost, I believe, we got to do our adequate research, and we got to begin to have these awareness sessions. Because at the end of the day, it's only going to happen first through beginning dialogue, because the end result is reconciliation and creating the community. But you don't get to direct action, which is protesting people, until you gather your information, educate everybody involved, make a personal commitment to the longevity of the process, and stand true to the nonviolent philosophy and principles, and then sitting at a table of negotiation. And so I believe that it starts first and foremost by this awareness that we've been talking about today, because most people are ignorant. Most of us in different ways are ignorant of certain things. And we've got to raise people's awareness, but also accept the fact that at the end of the day, there's some people that are going to live the rest of their life hateful, hostile, and not want to change. Daddy and them experienced that. But it does not discount the fact that there are those who are prime, who are wrestling in their inner being, that we don't plant the seeds anyway. Because at some point, they'll turn around like the gentleman who beat John Lewis in the latter years of his life and ask for an apology. So it's important that we do our educational campaign and be very intentional about that, to unearth what's hidden in our hearts and create that kind of environment. And I think you opened up to where people can really dialogue with dignity and respect.
Thank you, Dr. King, for speaking with us today. As an orator and a lawyer yourself, and a representative of your parents' legacy, can you clarify what duty, if any, you feel that you have to promote lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender equality?
I first and foremost feel that I have a responsibility to promote what I believe God releases me to promote. That's the first thing I want to say. My issue, so I can clarify, because I've heard so much stuff over and over again. Number one, I don't hate anybody. I want to clear that up. I'm not homophobic. I want to clear that up. I have a personal belief system about marriage. And I think one of the things that we have failed to do justice to in America is not allow people who have personal belief systems about an issue to have those. How they express them and how they address the people is a different thing. I have friends who are gay. And so I can't see how I would be homophobic if that were the case. And those friends know how I feel about the marriage issue in particular, because that's my fundamental issue. You know, there are other things I haven't even delved into to even think about, because I believe that the family was created and ordained first and foremost by God, that He instituted the marriage. And that's a law that He instituted and not us that we instituted. And so, if anything, I feel that I have a responsibility to promote love of each other and respect for the fact that that is something that a person feels, because I also don't believe everybody's born that way. I know some people have been violated. I know some people have unfortunately delved into it as an experiment. And I'm not saying everybody, hear what I first said. There are some people that is a genuine birthing experience. I won't say birthing experience, but a genuine part of who they are. But we can't say across the gamut that that's true. And so for me, my job is to promote love. That's my fundamental job in the universe. At the end of the day, whoever the person is to promote love. We love each other at the end of the day, because love will conquer whatever it is that we disagree about, whatever it is we don't see eye to eye about. And we've got to get out of demonizing people and putting everybody in the same category. I've been put in the category. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat either. I do vote, but that's my private choice as to how I vote. But we can't get in, well, I'll be public about it. I've never voted Republican. I can't say I won't ever vote that way, but I've never done it. But I've been accused of being right-wing. I've never said, if you're a homosexual, you're going to hell. That doesn't come out of my language, because that's not my belief system, that's not my determination. I'm not God. So my struggle is, accept me like you want me to accept you. Because it's unfair. You're saying, accept me in my fullness, but then I have to personally violate my belief system to accept you, and that's a form of violence. And so I just hope we elevate this discussion so we're not demonizing people. Because trust me, there's no hate, no hostility. Think about it, my mother and I disagreed on this. And anybody that knows me, I can't curse right now, but I love my mother. I love my mother more than I love my father. I know it sounds crazy, but I love my mother. And my mother we had dialogues about this. But she didn't demonize me and push me out as her child and say, don't embrace her and leave her alone. And we have a tendency to do that when it comes to this issue. And we've got to stop it, because that was not the spirit of the movement that my father led.
So I will take the prerogative of asking you the last question. 2013 is a seminal moment in, I believe, U.S. history for many reasons, as we stated earlier and as you stated earlier. So I wanted to find out from you, what are your plans for the 50th anniversary? What should we be doing as communities, communities of color, diverse communities across our country, to commemorate the legacy of your mother and father?
For those who can't gather in D.C., because there's going to be a big gathering there and probably 5 days of activities, I'm personally encouraging that we create tables of healing and reconciliation, because we're in desperate need of that in our society. If we're going to create the beloved community, then it's going to have to start at these tables. And we've got to have just like we had just now, a very difficult discussion. And we've got to have those and get to a place where we say, hey, okay, you're my brother, you're my sister. We don't see eye to eye on that, you know. But because there is that feeling of genuine love and care for the individual, period. And care doesn't always, I think we think care means any and everything about a person. If we don't embrace it, we don't care about a person. I don't know if I agree with that. You can care about a person's fundamental, you know, well-being in their very isness. And so I think the most important thing is to start Brown, and you may already be doing it, I don't know, at Brown University, Harvard. I don't know the other school that you said was a part of this. Johns Hopkins, today, I'm saying today, that's and Tougaloo, creating these purposeful tables of healing and reconciliation, because there are a lot of subjects that we don't want to discuss and have, and people are continuing to push stuff up, and I think that's some of the violence too, because people are frustrated and there's a lot of anger underneath the surface. So we got to create what South Africa did when they were transitioning from apartheid to a democratic society. They created the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. So we got to do the same thing, something similar to that here in America. And I think the best place as a part of honoring the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington and I Have a Dream speech.
Thank you very much. So I would now like to invite our wonderful Shades of Brown to come and provide our final musical selection. And please join us next door at Sales Hall for the book signing by Dr. King and a public reception. Shades of Brown.
Swing low, my sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, my sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, my sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, my sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing down, chariot, stop and let me ride. I want you to rock me, Lord, 'cause I got a home on the other side. 6 white horses prancing, prance by side. Want you to rock me, Lord, 'cause I got a home on the other side. Why don't you let me ride? Why don't you let me ride? Well, Ezekiel went out in the middle of the field, said he saw an angel with a chariot wheel. Wasn't too particular about the chariot wheel, he just wanted to know how the chariot feels. Swing low, sweet chariot. Swing down, chariot. I want you to rock me, Lord, 'cause I got a home on the other side. Swing low, Ezekiel went out and he got on board. A chariot went on rocking right on down the road. Wasn't too particular about the rocky road. He just wanted to lay down his heavy load. Swing down, chariot, stop and let me ride. Swing down, chariot, stop and I want you to rock me.